Hey guys, it's Layla from Ignite. If you like today's video, please do subscribe to our channel and click the bell for notifications. In today's video, I'm going to be addressing how to break down poems whenever you're confronted with one. So to do that, in this video, I'm going to take you through the history of poetry and how that should inform your approach to addressing poems. And I'm going to be giving you my 5 best techniques in terms of how to break down a poem. So when we consider what poetry is in terms of its form, it's important to remember that it's an oral text. Oral in the sense that poetry is kind of like music to be heard by the mind's ear. When we look at poetry, we have to consider how it actually sounds, because historically, poems were actually like a form of music. They were rhapsodes. And I've got a picture here of an interpretation of Homer reading his very ancient texts to his contemporaries at the time. Because of this history of musicality behind poetry, when you're looking at it, it's important to almost sound out the poem within your mind and consider how it's been written to be heard. Because in order to appreciate the form of a poem, we have to consider that lyricism, that musicality behind it. So I want you to keep that in mind whenever you're looking at a poem. Don't focus too much on the words themselves in a simple sense. Think about how this poem is written to be read out loud in the same way that it was in those ancient Greek days when we had rhapsodes that were being used to entertain those people in that context. So, in a nutshell there, we have to ask ourselves, how has the poem been constructed to convey an oral image to the mind's ear? So when we're considering the imagery of the poem, we have to consider how that's going to be received by the ear and then interpreted by the mind. So these are my 5 go-to techniques in terms of considering this formal aspect of a poem, and I guarantee you that if you go through these 5 steps, they'll be relevant to any poem that you address. The first point to consider is the persona's voice in the poem. Then we consider whether there is rhyme, rhythm, or meter. We then consider enjambment, the sounds that the poem may create at certain points, and whether there is a VOLTA in the poem. I'm going to go through each of these bits of analysis in more detail in the coming slides. So, starting off with the first one, the persona's voice. The persona is the voice of the poem in the same way that you say narrative voice in a short story or a novel. We use the word persona for a poem. And I want you to ask yourself, who is speaking here? Do we have a first person persona? And leading into the second question in terms of what kind of dialogue do they engage? If it's a first person persona, there might be a more intimate dialogue between the reader and the voice of the poem. If there is frequent use of direct second person appeal, such as the persona addressing us as you, as the reader, that might be more confronting or have more of a persuasive effect on the reader. Alternatively, we might have third person persona, a more omniscient voice that carries through the poem. So consider who is speaking to us, why are they using that particular voice, and consequently, how does this dictate your interaction with the text before you? And then we'd like to consider, what tone does this particular voice adopt? What mood is conveyed throughout the stanzas, and how is that enhanced by it either being written in the first person or the second or the third? And then of course, once you consider all of these questions in their totality, start to interpret what the effect of this particular voice is. And that's just your starting point. Who is speaking? Why are they speaking in this voice? And what's the effect of that? After considering the poetic voice, you then want to take a step back and consider, is there some sort of rhyme scheme that's being used? Is there a rhythm that's conveyed throughout the poem? Or is there a meter that's been used throughout? And I think this particular point of focus speaks to the musicality behind poetry. When you read it out loud, do the sounds that the poem evokes draw our attention to particular words? Does it enhance the tone in a certain way through the rhythm that's created? So going step by step, is there a rhyme scheme, and does that rhyme emphasize certain words within the lines, and do those words then hold specific value within the poem? That's something we ought to consider. Is there a rhythm, and how does this impact the tone? If we've got a poem that is conveying a very kind of serene and calm setting, guaranteed you would have a tone, or a rhythm rather, that is reflective of that particular tone that is being conveyed. If, for example, we have more of a violent interaction between characters in poems, or there is more of an action scene that's being conveyed, the rhythm may be more disruptive within the poem. So consider what is the rhythm within the text and how does this correlate or in fact enhance the kinds of meanings that are being conveyed. And thirdly, is there a linguistic pattern of sounds which gives the poem a melody? And that's what meter is. This is where we're focusing on the beats within the line and where stress lies within each syllabus. And that's what meter is. And I just in the next slide wanted to focus on a specific example of meter that's used in poetry. And students often pick up within poetry that there might be an iambic pentameter that's being used. And that's also relevant to a lot of plays, particularly if you're studying Shakespeare. And a lot of students don't actually know what that aspect of meter is. So I just wanted to explain that. So when we look at the term iambic pentameter, there's obviously two key parts here. And iamb refers to where stress lies in each syllable to create a beat in a poem. And an iamb is specifically one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one throughout the poem. And that's where you hear within the poem a movement such as da-da, 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 da-da. So that kind of unstressed followed by a stressed is what the iamb is. Pentameter refers to how many beats you have per line, and it comes from the Greek word for 5. And if you have, for example, 4 beats per line, it might be a tetrameter. Or if you have 3, a trimeter. So when we look at the two together, iamb is when you have unstressed followed by stressed, and the pentameter is how many of those couples of beats we have within the line. So that's just going into a little bit more depth of one aspect of meter, and I think that's quite useful for you to know what that actually means in terms of poetry, or if you're looking at theatre, particularly in light of Shakespeare, because he very commonly uses the iambic pentameter. Okay, moving on, in a poem, you might like to consider whether there is enjambment. Now, enjambment is when one line in the poem moves on to the next without any punctuation. So it's like a run-on line. So if you notice in a poem, there's a separation of sentences, but there is no comma or full stop or colon between them, that's enjambment. And then you might consider, well, what's the actual effect of that? In my view, when you have a lot of enjambment, so not a lot of pause throughout the poem, it kind of speeds up the pace, or it may even enhance the authenticity of the poet's voice, because it's almost as though there's a rant coming through, going one line to the next without any pause. It may also enhance a sense of a stream of consciousness throughout the poem, this idea that the thoughts of the persona are not constrained by punctuation as much, speaks to this kind of free interpretation of what's within the mind of the persona. So there's a few interpretations of what might be the effect of enjambment and how you can interpret that within your own analysis. Of course, we also want to consider what are the actual sounds that are being conveyed in the poem. So you might like to consider, okay, is there a repetition of any type of sound, which of course we refer to as alliteration. If there is a repetition of an S sound, we call that sibilance. Typically, repetition of S sounds may have more of a sinister undertone. They may be sensual or they may be calming within the poem. And assonance is the repetition of the same types of sounds in consecutive syllables or in consecutive words. So connect the sounds of the poem and maybe even think of them in light of the syntax. If you've got a very slow syntax, and by that I mean lots of clauses, lots of pauses within the same sentence, coupled with sibilance, that might have a really calming effect on the reader. So think about those sounds, place them within the context of the poem, and then think of them in light of the sentence construction, that being syntax, and the overall tone that is then conveyed within the poem. And the last point I'd like to consider is whether there are any voltas in the poem. Volta is an Italian word for turn, and in light of literary poetic analysis, it literally means whenever there is a drastic change in the tone of the poem. So if you have a poem that is tracing a particular progression, and by say the third stanza there's a stark turn in the tone that is being used, which maybe marks a development in the persona in some way, you can refer to that as the volta. Alright guys, well thank you so much for watching. I hope there you've got a group of techniques that you can use to apply any poem that you come across. What I'd really like you to take away from this video is to remember that a poem is written to be heard. So you must consider, and in fact you should really read out poems when you come across them, to think about the sounds, the rhythms, the meters that are being used, and use the notion of the historical aspect of the poem, the fact that it was the rhapsode, it was written to be read out loud, and remember that whenever you're addressing a poetic form. Break down how it sounds and construe your meaning through that particular lens. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, comment. We'll get back to you when we can. But for now, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right guys, thanks for watching, and please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehse.com.au and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.